Hello and welcome to Food for You and the Planet, a fresh new podcast that explores healthy and environmentally sustainable food solutions. This podcast is brought to you by Healthy Plan Eat Online Farmers Market. I'm Dr. Rosemary Ostfeld and I'm your host. Together, we'll hear from leaders in environmental science, agriculture, medicine, nutrition, entrepreneurship, and more. Be sure to hit the subscribe button to hear all the latest in healthy and sustainable food with Food for You and the Planet. Today's episode features Sunny Baker, Senior Director of Programs and Policy at the National Farm to School Network. For over 14 years, Sunny has worked to lead school food reform and create a new culture of regionally based eating. Originally from St. Louis, Sunny grew up with a deep appreciation for the natural world and a strong desire to make a positive impact on her community, values shaped by her Jewish identity. One of Sunny's most notable accomplishments was her work growing the farm-to-school movement in Mississippi, featured at TedXManhattan in 2014. She established Good Food for Oxford Schools and co-founded the Mississippi Farm-to-School Network during her decade in the state. Sunny's career has led to her making meaningful connections between food systems and food justice work, which she sees as a crucial component of racial and economic justice. She believes every child has a right to nourishing, culturally appropriate food at school, regardless of their income, race, or geographic location. She is a frequent speaker at conferences and events where she shares her expertise on topics such as food sovereignty and the future of school food. A graduate of Hendrix College, Sunny is now located in Little Rock, Arkansas. Thanks so much for being here today, Sunny.
Grateful to be here. Thanks for having me.
So what is the National Farm to School Network and what type of work does it do?
So the National Farm to School Network is this place where people are connecting to one another to grow the farm to school movement, where people are connecting to resources and people are connecting to policy. So we found that this movement has been incredibly grassroots from the very beginning, and the more that people were able to share resources and build collective action, the more we were seeing farm to school grow. And to ground us in what farm to school is, to start, so farm to school is really three different things. It's local food procurement. It's getting locally grown food into school cafeterias and early child care center cafeterias. It's school gardens, ensuring that kids have their hands in the dirt and in the soil and helping understand that process of how food gets to us, and education. So making sure that we are graduating future citizens that understand the importance of food that's good for you and good for the planet.
How did you become interested in a career in sustainable food and agriculture?
I always knew I wanted to do nonprofit work, and I love that quote, be the change you want to see in this world. And food so resonated with me. I just love the joy of eating and enjoying meals with other people. And I just loved that this movement is, it's more than doing good for our planet and doing good for our local economies and working towards that racial and economic justice piece. It's also like a real joy to share a meal with people and to share food and do dinners and all of that. And so that just so resonated with me. I took a class in college called, it was a sociology class called Food, Culture, and Nature with Dr. Stella Chopek, and it just blew my mind, making all these connections into like how it is that food shows up in front of us. And I was like, this seems like something we could change and we would all be better for it.
So when did the National Farm to School Network begin, and what are some of the key moments in the organization's history?
Yeah. So, like I said, it was really driven around that idea that the more people connected with one another, that the more farm to school would grow. This is not a new concept. Even in the early stages of the school meal program and just before there was a school meal program, this idea that we are getting food from local farmers is not a new concept. And it's something that so many cultures have just done because it's the way that it is. But the way that our food system evolved and the way that our school food system evolved meant that we were really leaning towards consolidation, and we were trying to figure out as a society how to get, cheap food that was good enough to kids quickly and easily. And it started to leave out some of those pieces about the joy of food and the community aspect of food. And that is really where National Farm to School Network got its origins. In 2007, it was groups of people coming together in Southern California to learn how to grow the movement. And then we started to see it pop up all over the country with leaders from Vermont to Mississippi to Michigan to Oregon to Florida to now Guam, Puerto Rico, US Virgin Islands, and many of the tribal nations as well, learning from one another and figuring out the best ways to grow this really shouldn't be radical, but this radical thing that we're gonna not do the fast, cheap, easy food, but we're gonna do the food that really aligns with our spirits and our values.
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably remember the fast, cheap food in their school lunch program. So how did the school lunch program begin and why did it start?
I love telling this story because I find it so fascinating and I'm such a school food nerd. But it was in the 1930s. So during the Great Depression, parents, mostly mothers, were in schools feeding kids because they were finding that a lot of the students in those schools weren't eating at home. And it was out of necessity. It was out of they're not going to learn if they're not fed. And it was this really community care aspect. And then those people, those moms lobbied the federal government for support and for help, which is how President Truman signed the National School Lunch Program into being. And as a part of that original school lunch legislation, agriculture has been built in from the very beginning because as we all know, in the Great Depression, agriculture really suffered. And as a country, as a society, we were trying to figure out this tug and pull between production of food and hungry people. And so in that original legislation, it was always intended that excess commodity agriculture would make its way into the school food program. So, um, and then another thing I love to mention is that President Truman wanted American cultural norms to show up in the school food program. So not only was this meant to feed kids, to support agriculture, but there were a lot of new Americans in our country at that time. There were a lot of indigenous Americans that were being indoctrinated into American culture. And so it was intended from the beginning to teach American cultural norms. So while those origins from my read are problematic in many ways, it also provides for a great opportunity for us to look at what the cultural norms are that we're teaching in schools and as a part of school lunch, and this concept that kids learn throughout the whole day and then they enter into the cafeteria, and what are they learning? This is another learning environment, and we believe that as sacred little beings that they are, that they should be learning that they deserve really good, delicious food that's nutrient dense and supports community, that they're seeing their culture, their people represented on the tray, and that sort of thing. And one more thing I have to mention as a part of this is that National Farm to School Network, um, probably 10 years ago or so, started really tuning into the systems change design of the farm to school program. And as a huge part of that, it was the shifting of power and how racial equity was showing up in the movement, and NFSN wanting to be a part of that shifting of power. And that is built into the school food program. So the school breakfast program in our country is based on a Black Panther Party school breakfast program that was developed in Northern California in the 60s as a part of their community outreach efforts. The program that we have in every school today is based off of this program that showed that hungry kids are angry kids, they can't learn, and that this is really a part of community care. So the whole program is meant as this social justice movement as well.
Well, you've just taught myself and the listeners a whole bunch of really interesting things about the Farm to School program, but are there some more things that the average person may not know, or they may find surprising about, like what's required to be on the plate or anything else that might come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I find this fascinating. There are 5 meal components that have to show up on a cafeteria tray, and those are so thoroughly researched and vetted and lobbied and discussed and talked about. And the thing that I would want to break down for like a larger audience is that um there's a lot of influence into what shows up for those 5 things on a tray. So, um, we have meat alternative, fruit, vegetable, grain, and a carton of milk, a cup of milk. So those are the 5 components. And there's just a lot of research that goes into figuring out how those components are showing up in schools. To me, the real disconnect is that we put all this work into those meal components, which are largely based off of the US dietary guidelines for Americans, which are thoroughly researched, thoroughly vetted on them. And yet, our agricultural spending, which is one of the largest spending bills in our country, the Farm Bill, do not align at all with those dietary guidelines. So a huge part of the Farm Bill is SNAP, is food stamps, and we need that to be a robust program that stays around, especially so long as we're not changing minimum wage or making those other big systems change moves. But the amount of money that goes into commodity agriculture, so cotton and soy and corn and stuff that we're either not eating or we're eating in the form of like cattle feed or high fructose corn syrup or fillers for food, that is the vast majority of where our taxpayer dollars are going to farmers. And the programs that are going to what is labeled as specialty crops, fruits and vegetables, which should be taking up at least half of our tray, half of our plate, is less than 1% of that spending. And so it does not align. It does not make sense to be a fruit and vegetable grower in the United States. In many places, it's not an easy market to access. And until we change that part of our spending, we're not going to see the real changes in the health of Americans and in the health of children.
So you've already started to describe some of these challenges, but what are some other challenges with the current school lunch program, and how can we start to increase procurement of locally grown fruits and vegetables into the school meal program?
Yeah, so many schools and school districts and early childcare education centers have gone above and beyond to do incredible things for their school meal programs. So while there are all these challenges, there are a gazillion schools. Our latest USDA Farm to School census results showed the largest increase that we, just did not anticipate even as a part of the pandemic. And we have like 74% of school districts in this country participating in this program now. So, I mean, that is a huge investment in our local economies, and it's just really beautiful. That said, it's not the norm. It's not the easy choice to make. It's not, you know, even doable for some communities. We have such a small amount of money that goes towards food. It ends up being like around $1 per tray for food costs when you take care of your staff and equipment charges. And in the states that don't have free school meals for um, all of that paperwork that you have to do for processing applications for free and reduced lunch and all that. So some of those challenges, many schools have found beautiful ways to navigate and get around and build relationships with farmers. And there's people like you out there that are doing this incredible work to be that in between, because I've seen so many schools, and I did this myself, like where you're putting pallets of strawberries in the back of your car to deliver to schools, or, you know, a farmer is really going out of their way to like deliver. Schools are going out of their way to pick up and find and meet these farmers. And what we need are really like good infrastructure, sustainable ways for schools to be able to access this type of food.
So what type of work is the National Farm to School Network doing to create universal values aligned school meals? And can you tell me a little bit more about what that encompasses?
Yeah. So once again, with those challenges, one of the big challenges is that currently in this country, except for in a handful of states, we are divvying kids up into 3 categories: the ability to pay for school meals, ability being relative, um, a reduced cost school meal, so that's 40 cents per school meal, and a free school meal. And when you're separating kids into those 3 categories, a couple different things happen. One is it's a huge burden on the school district to have to process all those applications and chase down families and parents. And then you get all these people that fall into the cracks, or like their salaries change and they can't access it. So you have all of these additional burdens on the school district, and all of these circumstances in which families are not accessing the food that their children need. And it is by no means a child's responsibility to have to, you know, figure this out. Like, we should be ensuring that children are accessing food when they're at school. Think about how hungry you get if you haven't had, you know, something even in a couple of hours, and now expect that kid to go learn complicated topics and social skills in a classroom. And as I mentioned earlier, that the Black Panther Party was finding that hungry kids are angry kids, and all of that. So in the pandemic, we achieved something that in the school food reform movement we have been fighting for so long, and that was universal school meals. In the pandemic, when everything broke down and our society was really, really siphoning and figuring out what was the most important things to keep our society functioning, school food rose to the top as one of those things. And we provided universal school meals to all students, something that we fought for so long. And we had child nutrition staff on the front lines, putting themselves on the front lines in the way that nurses and doctors and those community leaders were, making sure that the kids got fed and did not starve during the pandemic. And the results of that, while the pandemic was awful and terrible and we wish it hadn't happened, the results of the universal school meal program were amazing. And we were ensuring that children were fed. We were ensuring that these creative, unique ways of getting local foods to kids when the supply chain broke down, were, being navigated and figured out, and people were really coming together around food. And we thought for sure it wouldn't go away since it was so successful, this program, and it did. And it was devastating for so many school districts and so many families that they didn't have access to those free school meals anymore. I'm in Central Arkansas, and our school district does not have universal school meals anymore. And it's confusing and distressing for families who, we don't have consistency in jobs in our community and all that. So we want at the National Farm to School Network and collectively universal school meals. And we also know that that food has to be good for kids, good for our communities, our local economies, and for the environment. And that is where our campaign called Who's at the Table and values aligned universal school meals comes into play, because we don't just want food in front of kids. We want food that is nourishing and good for our kids.
Now, how does early childhood education fit in with the school lunch programs?
Man, it is so much easier to convince a very young child to try new foods and be adventurous. And I have a 4-year-old myself, and the things that she'll try versus her 8-year-old sister. I mean, I see it right here in my own home, especially if they like pull a radish out of the ground. It's so exciting. It's bright pink, and on and on. So we know that the earlier that we access kids, and in reality, the earlier we access those palates and what they like to eat, and start developing those taste buds and trying new things and having this, adventurous eating patterns show up in their life, the more success we're going to have in kindergarten through 12th grade through college. It is hard enough to feed kids. It is exceptionally hard to feed kids food that is good for them. And in these settings, these group settings where they're together, is what research shows the best place to be introducing those types of foods and adventurous foods and nutrient dense foods. So the early childhood education space, so that's daycares, preschools, Head Start centers, that is an incredible place to introduce these foods and make those changes. And also, we're feeding tinier bellies. So for farmers, it's a great access point to the school market because it's usually a smaller amount. And I'm sure you've seen this in your program too, Rosemary, and just how this is a great entryway for farmers to access those markets, and can be so cool too. So we want kids that little to be experiencing programs like this. And when you're so tiny too, you do not have a lot of power in this world. You are often being shuttled around and shown things, but to give a kid that little a seed and let them plant it and like see something grow, that's very powerful and such a joy for our little ones.
I love that. That type of work is so special. What type of work is the National Farm to School Network doing in collaboration with Native communities?
So I spoke earlier about some of this incredible innovation and this way that farm to school has showed up across the country, even amidst the challenges. But Indigenous communities, tribal nations, Native communities have been on the forefront of that and ensuring that foods are important to their cultures and their people are showing up for kids who are in public school systems and tribal school systems, BIE school systems. So we have worked with the Crow Nation in Montana, with getting local buffalo into schools and ensuring that those students are, working with indigenous crops. We've worked with communities in Alaska to ensure that local salmon is showing up, which, to me sounds like a delight. It's one of my favorite foods. But to communities in Alaska, ensuring that salmon that is like been exported across the country is getting to the students and to the communities where having a taste for salmon. I mean, I have heard from this incredible representative, state representative from Alaska, about how important it is for little ones to have to be teething on salmon jerky so that they get that taste in their mouth. And because of climate change and because of the way that we're exporting salmon and the taste for salmon everywhere, there hasn't been enough salmon for communities there. So ensuring that some of that food resiliency and reclaiming of traditional foodways and habits is very important. I could go on and on about the incredible ways that this has happened. We work with Linda Black Elk a lot, from Natives in Minnesota, on her work on foodways and ensuring that students and children in Native communities know about foraging and know about Native foods. We work with an incredible nutritionist from New Mexico, Danae Becks, who has like these incredible stories about corn and reclaiming corn and ensuring that corn is showing up for babies as first food, and that sort of thing. There's programs in Hawaii and in Guam. I mean, this is one of the most incredible things about doing this work, is getting to work with Indigenous communities.
That sounds amazing, and it just seems so cool to think about all of the possibilities that could exist within each region and connecting people to the local food systems. So how does the National Farm to School Network support local food producers in this process with Farm to School?
Yeah, so similar. And my background is in school food and in the cafeterias and in the dish pits. So that's really like where my head is when I come to this. But in the same way that it's a learning curve for schools to learn how to procure local food and teach about food, it is a real learning curve for farmers and producers to figure out, as you know, well, to figure out how to access those markets. So we have worked with the USDA and National Center for Appropriate Technology to develop a training model for farmers called Bringing the Farm to the School. That is all those details that you need about accessing school markets. We've also created a BIPOC Farmer League, so Black, Indigenous, people of color league of farmers that are helping support one another and find those unique challenges that BIPOC farmers specifically face when accessing those markets. And we want to be sure that we are doing whatever we can to support our partners on the ground to support their farmers and producers to access school and ECE markets.
What are some of the greatest challenges with getting local food into school lunch programs?
Transportation, aggregation, so much of what you're doing, Rosemary, too, in terms of like ensuring that, schools have a hard enough time feeding these kids just in the basic way that it is set up to feed students. It's so complicated. You're operating restaurants and your clients are children. And you have to make sure that you are getting food that meets those guidelines on the plate that they're going to eat too. Because we like to say, like, we don't want healthy trash cans, like we want healthy children. So in terms of like greatest challenges, so much of it is around logistics. It's around stuff like refrigerated trucks and ensuring that there are drop points and pickup points. And we have figured out, how to market different new foods to schools, how to cook it and prepare it in a way that kids are going to eat it. I mean, it's some of these things like frozen blueberries, which is, a big thing that we do in Mississippi in the deep South. Blueberries are so good, but that timing of blueberry harvest doesn't always line up with when kids are in school. But we know that they love frozen blueberries. It's wild. So, figuring out and navigating those challenges in a setting and in an environment where there's not been historically a ton of support for figuring out those challenges. Those food manufacturing companies, they have figured it out. They have researched the marketing power and the, culinary power to figure out exactly what a kid is going to like put in their mouth and be like, give me more. I want more of that processed food. We have a bigger challenge ahead of us to get them to like, the original foods that are coming out of the ground and out of the sea. So yeah, I would say logistics and then just the resources.
What are some of the greatest lessons you've learned while advocating for farm to school, or any great success stories?
Yeah, I think this is this stage two in our conversation where I talk about like how impactful it has been for me, especially when I lived in Mississippi for 10 years, to align this work and like deeply root this work into racial justice and economic equity. Um, because it's that same concept of like, if we're doing that type of work, if we're ensuring that, power is shifting and people have like the inherent ability to thrive and do well in their lives and for their families, like that is a win for all of us. But it also ensures that we are like recognizing the sacredness of children and our society's responsibility to children and to the next generation, and not just ensuring that they like make it and they're alive, but that they're nourished and they are cared for, and that we're showing children that they deserve. I always say, like, we need to brainwash them into thinking that they deserve really good food. And I usually start with the delicious part, and that is like just a part of my, interest in this field myself, as we talked about earlier. But good food really unites people. And sitting around a table and sharing your culture and your community. I mentioned that I'm Jewish too, like earlier, like baking challah for someone or like matzo ball soup. When someone shares their community and their culture with me, man, in Mississippi, I was just there last week. There's no better food in the world. I'm sorry to say, but like, my friend chef Nick Wallace was like making us lunch for this farm to ECE gathering, and it's just like when you can be around one another and in community with food and sharing in that way with one another, we're going to understand each other better, we're going to advocate for one another better, and that's how this movement moves forward. Because we may not have the money power that those big food companies and the current people in power have, but we do have the people power. And the more that we're able to work on this collective action, the more we're going to see these amazing lessons and these amazing foods show up.
I love that. Are there any other things that you'd like to share or add before we close?
I mean, I've got like a gazillion good food stories in schools, but I'll just tell you one from Minnesota, which I think is a really beautiful example of what this looks like. So this little town in Minnesota, I'm going to look it up while we're chatting so I don't forget the name. They had a sudden Somali population show up, like a bunch of new Somali Americans show up into the community. And instead of just putting them right into the school system and, making them figure out what it's like to be the school food service director in this district, worked with the Somali parents to come up with a recipe for a sambusa, which, as the kids describe to their classmates, is like a Somali hot pocket. And it's so good and it's so yummy. And I just have this beautiful picture, and I can send it to you too, of these kids enjoying these sambusas together. And I just think about that and how beautiful that is, and what a wonderful way to connect a community and to like not just welcome people, but really like honor the places where they came from. And those moms who helped create that recipe with the school district went on and started their own food business, selling sambusas in the community. And I love that so much. And in a place like Minnesota, where the growing season is very short, they are killing it in the farm to school world and in procurement. And I love that we can come up with creative solutions to these problems and challenges together, and then get to eat delicious sambusas in community with one another.
Yeah, food is such a great way to bring people together. So that's a really cool success story. I love that. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Sunny. It was wonderful to speak to you. And thank you so much for your work that you're doing with Farm to School.
Thank you.